We are learning more about this couple. They shared 2 kids together, including a 1-year-old that was there at the time of the shooting. Sources tell us there were some domestic issues between them, but nothing to suggest a murder-suicide is how this would end.
Since this has happened, I've just scoured every document that we have involving the officers, and nothing jumps out at you at all. Model officers, no issues.
On February 19th, 2023, at approximately 7 a.m., 22-year-old Maria Martin was found shot multiple times inside a townhome on Farmington Road in Livonia, Michigan. Her partner and fellow Detroit police officer, Matthew Ethington, lay nearby, dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. A baby was in that home, unharmed, waiting. What drove a man who shared a badge, a bed, and a child with Maria to make that choice? Why didn't anyone see this coming? And could anything have saved her? This is the story of Maria Martin, the rookie officer, the devoted mother, whose life ended behind closed doors. Maria Martin was born in 2000 in the Detroit area, the youngest kind of soul that a struggling city could produce. Someone who absorbed the hardship around her and somehow came out warmer for it. She grew up in a household held together by her mother, a woman who would later become not just Maria's parent, but her closest confidant, her emergency contact, her safe place to land. It wasn't always easy, but Maria wasn't the kind of person who needed easy. She needed purpose, and from a young age, she was already searching for it. Everyone who met Maria knew within minutes that she was someone special. She had this way of making people feel like the most important person in the room, not because she was performing it, but because she genuinely meant it. Friends remember her as the kind of person who would give you the shirt off her back without a second thought. Her laugh was infectious, her energy was magnetic, and her loyalty to the people she loved ran bone deep. According to her mother, Maria was a bundle of joy from the very beginning, curious, stubborn in the best possible way. She pushed back when something didn't sit right with her, and she held on tight to the things that did. Her mother described her as someone who felt everything fully: joy, frustration, love, without apology. She always wanted to help, her mother said later. Even as a little girl, she just wanted to make things better for people. That impulse would define every major decision Maria made. She knew exactly what she wanted to do with her life: law enforcement. Not because it was glamorous. She understood better than most that it wasn't, but because she believed she could be a different kind of officer. She'd grown up watching the complicated, often painful relationship between the Detroit Police Department and the communities it served. She wanted to be the cop that people actually trusted, the one who remembered your name, the one who showed up and made things better, not worse. That conviction never wavered. She worked hard to get there. Maria went through the Detroit Police Department's recruit training program and graduated with her class while still in her early 20s. Young, yes. But nobody who worked alongside her mistook youth for inexperience. She took the job seriously from day one. She engaged with people on her beat the way seasoned officers spend years learning to do. She listened, she paid attention, she cared. Outside the uniform, Maria's world revolved around her children. She was a devoted mother, the kind who talked about her kids constantly, who lit up describing the smallest milestones, who made every decision with them at the center of it. Working the demanding schedule of a patrol officer while raising children isn't easy for anyone. Maria did it without complaint. Her mother helped. The two of them built a rhythm together: child care coordination, check-in calls, the steady back and forth of a family keeping each other afloat. By early 2023, Maria had her badge, her kids, her career, and her mother in her corner. She was 22 years old, with a full life stretching out ahead of her. She had no idea she had only weeks left to live. When Maria first got together with Matthew Ethington II, it made a certain kind of sense. They were both young, both Detroit police officers, both navigating the same brutal schedule, the same community pressures, the same particular exhaustion that comes with pinning on a badge every day. They spoke the same language. They understood each other's world in a way most people outside law enforcement never could. At first, everything seemed promising. Matthew was confident, attentive, and clearly taken with Maria. Friends who knew them in the early days described him as charming, the kind of guy who made you feel like he had everything under control. They moved fast. They had a child together. They shared a home on Farmington Road in Livonia. To people looking in from the outside, they looked like two ambitious young people building something real. But that picture had cracks in it that not everyone could see. Matthew Ethington was 26 years old, 4 years older than Maria, and somewhere along the way, the confidence that had seemed so appealing curdled into something else, something that needed to control. The shift didn't happen all at once. It rarely does. But people close to Maria started noticing things, small things at first, then bigger ones. He didn't want her going out without him. He'd bombard her with questions about where she was, who she was with, what she was doing, even when she was working the same job, in the same department, in the same city. He checked her phone. He monitored her movements. What he framed as protectiveness had become, over time, a cage. His jealousy turned to obsession. The arguments became more heated. And Maria, strong, capable, clear-eyed Maria, found herself managing his moods instead of living her life. This dynamic is painfully common in domestic violence cases. It's even more complicated when both partners are law enforcement. If research has shown consistently that domestic violence rates within police families run significantly higher than in the general population. The traits that can make someone effective in the field, control, dominance, a need to manage outcomes, can become weapons behind closed doors. And when both people in the relationship carry firearms as part of their daily job, the danger calculus changes entirely. Maria's mother was paying attention. She heard the tension in her daughter's voice on phone calls. She noticed the way Maria would carefully redirect certain conversations, smooth things over, minimize what was happening at home. The way people in difficult relationships do not because they're blind to it, but because they're surviving it. Maria was trying to hold things together, for her kids, for her career, for whatever version of stability she could still maintain inside that townhome. But by early February 2023, stability was no longer possible. The relationship had started exhibiting signs of wanting more control on Matthew's side and less tolerance on Maria's. Whether she had told him directly that she was done, whether there had been one specific confrontation that pushed him past whatever edge he was already standing on, that answer died with him. What's clear is that something shifted in those final weeks, something that set in motion everything that followed. The arguments inside that Farmington Road townhome had become their own presence, not occasional flare-ups that burned out and resolved. A constant. The kind of tension that lives in the walls of a house and changes the air inside it. People close to Maria had been watching the relationship deteriorate for months. Her mother, in particular. She was embedded in their daily lives, babysitting, checking in, staying close. She paid attention not just to what Maria said, but to what she didn't say. The hesitations, the careful word choices, the way certain topics would go quiet when Matthew was nearby. By the first week of February 2023, whatever fragile equilibrium had existed between Maria and Matthew was gone. February 17th, 2023, 2 days before. Maria's mother spoke with her daughter. It was the kind of call they had often, coordinating childcare, checking in, the everyday rhythm of a family staying close. Maria's mother had the oldest grandchild with her. The baby was at the townhome. The conversation was surface-level normal. But her mother listened carefully, the way mothers do when they know something is off and can't yet name it. This would be one of the last calm conversations they'd ever have. February 18th, 2023, the night before. The tension in the townhome had not eased. Whatever had been building between Maria and Matthew was still there, unresolved, pressurized. Maria got through the evening. She got the baby settled. She moved through the routines that anchor a young mother's night. Little did she know that when she woke up the next morning, she would have hours left. February 19th, 2023, the morning. Maria was up early. Matthew was there. Somewhere between 6:30 a.m. and 7 a.m., she called her mother. It should have been a routine check-in, but the moment her mother picked up, something was wrong. In the background, audible and urgent, Maria and Matthew were arguing. Not the low-level friction her mother had grown used to hearing. This was different, sharper. The kind of argument that doesn't sound like it's heading anywhere good. Then the call went dead. Her mother tried calling back immediately. No answer. She tried again. Still nothing. She kept trying. Every unanswered call tightened something in her chest. Maria always called back. Always. In just minutes, that silence would become the most terrifying sound of her mother's life. Maria's mother didn't wait. She flagged down a passing police officer in the area, told him what she'd heard on that call, and handed over the garage door opener to the Farmington Road townhome. She needed someone to get inside that house. She needed someone to check on her daughter. She had no idea it was already too late. When officers used the opener and entered the townhome that morning, the scene that met them told a terrible story. Maria Martin had been shot multiple times. She was gone. Matthew Ethington was also inside the home, dead from a single gunshot wound, self-inflicted. He had killed her. Then he had turned the gun on himself. And in that same house, amid all of it, there was a baby, alive, unharmed, too young to understand, too young to know that the mother who loved them more than anything in this world was never coming back. First responders secured the infant immediately. The child was placed into the care of another family member. But for the officers who entered that townhome, some of whom likely knew Maria and Matthew personally, and given they all wore the same badge, there was no amount of training that could have prepared them for what they walked into. The Wayne County Medical Examiner's office was notified. Both bodies were processed at the scene. The findings that would follow were unambiguous. Maria had sustained multiple gunshot wounds. Her death was a homicide. Matthew's wound was consistent with suicide. This wasn't a mystery. There was no unknown suspect. The person who killed Maria Martin was already dead. Detroit Police Chief James White addressed the public later that day. He confirmed that the incident appeared domestic in nature. He didn't minimize it. He didn't reach for careful language designed to soften what had happened. 2 of his officers were dead. 1 had killed the other. That was the reality. and he named it. For the officers who responded to that townhome on Farmington Road on the morning of February 19th, the professional instinct kicked in. Secure the scene, protect the child, document everything. But underneath that, for anyone who had known Maria Martin, there was something else entirely. Grief, shock, and the particular devastation of realizing that the danger had been inside the house all along. Maria was 22 years old. She had her whole career ahead of her. She had children who needed her. She had a mother who had been trying to reach her for the better part of an hour before anyone got through that garage door. She deserved better. She deserved more time. And she deserved to be safe inside her own home. Because Matthew Ethington was dead, there was no suspect to chase down, no alibi to dismantle, no interrogation room. But investigators didn't simply close the file. What followed was a methodical process of documentation, building the clearest possible record of what had happened inside that townhome and what had been happening inside that relationship long before February 19th. The medical examiner's findings came first. Maria had been shot multiple times. Matthew had a single self-inflicted gunshot wound. The manner of Maria's death was ruled homicide. Clean, unambiguous. This wasn't an accident, and it wasn't mutual. Maria was the victim. Matthew was the perpetrator. The evidence said so without equivocation. The first major break in building the full picture came from Maria's mother. Her account was immediate, detailed, and credible. She told investigators exactly what she'd heard on that phone call. The argument audible in the background, the abrupt disconnect, the cascade of unanswered callbacks that followed. She described the pattern she'd observed in the relationship over months. The control, the escalating tension, the way Matthew had started exhibiting signs of wanting more control as time went on. Her testimony didn't just place a timeline on Maria's final hours. It provided context that investigators needed to understand how the relationship had arrived at that morning. But that wasn't all. Investigators mapped the broader history between Maria and Matthew. The dynamics that people in Maria's orbit had witnessed firsthand. In domestic violence, homicide cases, law enforcement doesn't just document the final incident. They trace the pattern. And the pattern here was consistent with what researchers and advocates recognize as a relationship moving toward lethal danger. Escalating control, increasing conflict, isolation, and a perpetrator whose grip on the relationship had been slipping in the weeks before the killing. The evidence was mounting into a picture that was painful but clear. The fact that both Maria and Matthew were law enforcement officers added a layer of complexity that couldn't be ignored. Their colleagues at the Detroit Police Department were now processing grief and shock at the same time. Chief James White spoke publicly about the loss, and in the days that followed, voices inside the first responder community began raising questions that the profession had long been reluctant to answer honestly. According to the organization First Help, which focuses specifically on mental health among first responders, more officers die by suicide than in the line of duty. That statistic alone reframes how we think about what happened on Farmington Road. This wasn't just a domestic violence case. It was a domestic violence case between two people who carried firearms as a condition of their employment. Two people who existed inside a professional culture that historically discourages asking for help, admitting struggle, or acknowledging that the danger sometimes lives at home. Maria had a firearm. Matthew had a firearm. That wasn't incidental to what happened. It was central to it. What investigators were left with was a complete picture, not of a mystery, but of a tragedy that had been building for months inside a relationship that too few people had the tools or the access to interrupt in time. There was no arrest in the Maria Martin case, no perp walk, no handcuffs, no defendant sitting across a courtroom while Maria's family watched from the gallery, waiting for justice to take its shape. Matthew Ethington had made sure of that when he turned the gun on himself inside that Farmington Road townhome. He removed himself from any accountability the legal system might have delivered. And in doing so, he took something else from Maria's family, the chance to sit in a room and watch someone answer for what he did. For families of murder-suicide victims, that absence is its own particular cruelty. There's no verdict to wait for, no moment where a jury stands up and says out loud, in a room full of people, that what happened to your loved one was wrong. No sentencing. No judge looking a perpetrator in the eye and naming exactly what he took and what it cost. The process that a courtroom provides, imperfect as it always is, simply isn't available. The case closes without ever feeling like it closed. Maria's family was left to grieve without that structure. What they had instead was the truth, established clearly by the medical examiner's findings, confirmed by investigators, stated publicly by Detroit's chief of police. Maria did not cause this. She was not responsible for what happened to her. She was a victim of domestic violence, killed by someone she had built a life with, someone who chose destruction as his final act. The record said so, plainly and permanently. Maria's mother carried the weight of that morning in a way that doesn't have words. She had been the one to sound the alarm. She had flagged down that officer. She had handed over the garage door opener. She had set in motion the discovery of her daughter's body. That knowledge, that she was the one who found out first, in the worst possible way, was hers to live with. But so was something else. The absolute certainty that she had tried, that she had stayed close, paid attention, and acted the moment she knew something was wrong. She had done everything a mother could do. It wasn't enough, and that wasn't her fault. Maria left behind her children. Her youngest, the baby found alive and unharmed in that townhome on the morning of February 19th, was placed immediately into the care of family. Her oldest had been with Maria's mother that morning, spared from being present when the worst of it unfolded. Both children would grow up knowing their mother through the people who loved her, through their grandmother's stories, through the memories of friends and colleagues who remembered the young officer who took the job seriously and talked about her kids like they hung the moon. Within the Detroit Police Department, Maria's death forced conversations that the institution had been slow to have. Chief James White spoke publicly and directly about the loss. In the weeks and months that followed, advocates and mental health organizations pushed harder for systemic change. Better intervention protocols for officers experiencing domestic violence, more accessible mental health resources, and a more honest reckoning with the culture of silence that exists inside many police departments. A culture that tells officers to be strong, stay in control, handle it, right up until the moment handling it is no longer possible. Organizations like First Help continued making the case that the profession needed to treat the danger inside officers' homes with the same urgency it treats the danger on the street. Maria's name became part of that conversation. One more young woman, one more mother, one more officer whose death could have been prevented if the right systems had existed and the right people had known how to use them. She was 22 years old. She had decades ahead of her. She had children who needed her, a mother who adored her, and a career she had worked hard to build. Matthew Ethington took all of it in a matter of minutes on a Sunday morning in February. Maria Martin deserved better. Our deepest sympathies go to the family and friends of Maria Martin, a daughter, a mother, a police officer, and a woman who deserved decades more of living. This case raises questions we can't stop asking. Why does domestic violence within law enforcement families remain so dramatically under-addressed? And what will it actually take for police departments across this country to build real intervention systems before another officer dies at home? If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, please reach out. National Domestic Violence Hotline 1-800-7997-233. Text START to 88788. You are not alone. Help is there. What are your thoughts on this case? Leave them in the comments below. And before you go, if this story moved you, please like, subscribe, and hit that bell. Stay safe. See you next time.